Okay, so yeah, measuring preconnects. Resource timing gives us connection time. So we can essentially, we can essentially know when a connection was reused because fetch start equals to connection start, connect start, connect end, and the main lookups. And essentially, we can know whether the resource we're on was pre-connected if the connect end equals to fetch start. But we can't really distinguish between implicit preconnects, which are preconnects that the browser has initiated because it knows things about the user, explicit preconnects, which are preconnects we explicitly said link rel preconnect as a developer told the browser to preconnect to a specific resource, or there was an existing persistent connection that was reused for that resource specifically. We also don't know when preconnects actually happened and whether they were actually useful, because even if we send a preconnect and we see an implicit and we see that the resource was preconnected, we don't know if this wasn't because of one of the other reasons. For implicit preconnects, yes, like I said, the browser knows things about the user and can connect to various hosts and various origins ahead of time. For persistent connections, yes, since HTTP 1, we have persistent connections that enable the browser to reuse them. And yes, explicit preconnects. Link rel preconnect. So I opened an issue many years ago about resource timing and preconnect and trying to figure out whether a preconnect was actually useful in trying to estimate its benefits. This has become recently more relevant with an early hints experiment from the folks at Cloudflare in collaboration with the Chrome networking team. They are so early hints is a way to send headers ahead of time. The browser sends a request to the server. The server then needs to figure out what the response to that request is. And in case of a CDN edge server, it needs to go to the origin server and get the actual response. But it can send headers ahead of time using a 103 early hint status. That is a new thing that is being experimented with in Chrome. And in this architecture that Cloudflare grew up on their blog post, they send those early hints from the cache, and those early hints can be used with preload headers. They can be used with preconnect headers in order to trigger the browser to either preload resources or preconnect them ahead of time. And that is so that's great. And for preloads, we can also estimate whether those preloads were useful using the resource timing API. But for preconnects, we don't really have a way to say, okay, this is a connection that happened because of the early hint and wasn't available before. So if people are to try and use that feature, it would be hard for them to estimate whether this is a useful feature or not so useful for their site and in the way that they're using it. So a few options on how we could try to distinguish the different preconnect types. We could have an enum on the resource timing entry indicating that a preconnect happened and indicating whether it was an implicit one, an explicit one, or a connection reuse. We could have completely separate entries for connections that would potentially be tricky in cases where the connection happened before the time origin. because we don't currently report any negative times, and this may result in some negative times some part of the time, or we could do something else altogether. Another question here is, there's the when did preconnects happen question that I am not personally sure if there's a strong use case for it. As long as that preconnect actually happened before the resource needed the connection, that seems like good enough for me, but I may be wrong here, so I would like the group's opinions on that. And yes, having separate connection entries would address this use case. But like I said, I'm not 100% sure that it's a strong one. And then finally, strong use case is finding useless preconnects. So if we preconnected to a certain origin, but then that origin was never used, that is a useless preconnect, and it would be good to tell developers that. Right now, we have no mechanism for doing that. Preload has console warnings, which are not necessarily significantly better than useless. Anecdotally, I see a lot of them all the time on very large sites that should know better. So maybe we need a better reporting mechanism. So we could add console warnings for preconnects. That seems like a baseline thing to do. But it seems like a good idea to augment both with the reporting API that tells people, hey, you have useless preconnects or preloads. Please don't. And with that, let's chat. Yeah, let me just stop the recording. And